There's a moment that happens in some relationships, long before any major fight ever begins. It's usually late at night. One person is quietly checking a banking app while the other person sleeps beside them. The room is dark except for the soft glow of the phone screen. Nothing dramatic is happening. No yelling. No obvious betrayal. But somehow, the relationship already feels different. And the strange part is, most couples don't notice the change while it's happening, because financial betrayal rarely arrives all at once. It grows quietly, inside small habits, shorter conversations, tiny moments of avoidance that slowly become emotional distance. Psychologists sometimes call this financial infidelity. It doesn't leave lipstick stains on a collar. It doesn't show up as suspicious text messages in the middle of the night. But it leaves something much harder to repair. Cracks inside emotional trust. And by the time someone finally says, "Something feels off between us," the emotional distance has often been growing for a very long time. Quietly, silently, in completely ordinary moments. One of the hardest truths about relationships is that money is rarely just about money. Most financial conflicts are actually about emotional safety, shame, vulnerability, control, fear, and the feeling of whether two people are truly building a life together. That's why financial secrets hurt so deeply. Because when someone hides financial truth, the other person often starts questioning more than numbers. They start questioning, what else don't I know? Why didn't they tell me? When did we stop being honest with each other? And what makes these situations psychologically complicated is that many people who keep financial secrets are not trying to hurt their partner. Sometimes they're ashamed, sometimes they're afraid, sometimes they simply don't know how to admit they're struggling. But unfortunately, secrecy changes people emotionally. Humans are incredibly sensitive to emotional inconsistency. We notice hesitation, distant avoidance, even when we cannot explain it logically. That's why many couples say, "I felt something was wrong long before I knew what it was." Tonight, we're talking about 5 financial secrets that quietly destroy trust between couples, not through dramatic explosions, but through emotional loneliness hidden inside normal daily life. Sign 1. Secret debt, hidden debt, and financial shame. One of the most common forms of financial infidelity is hidden debt. And what makes this painful is that it rarely begins with bad intentions. Most of the time, it starts during emotionally vulnerable moments. A stressful season, a few credit card payments that became harder to manage, a loan someone fully believed they could quietly pay off before their partner ever noticed. At first, the person usually tells themselves, "This is temporary, I'll fix it soon. I don't want to worry them." So life continues normally on the surface. Dinner conversations still happen. Weekend plans still happen. Family photos still get posted online. But emotionally, something subtle begins changing. A simple money question suddenly creates anxiety. How much is left on the card? Did you pay the bill already? Should we slow down spending this month? Normal conversations start feeling emotionally dangerous. And slowly, hiding becomes routine. Bank notifications get muted. Overdue emails get checked after midnight when everyone else is asleep. The mailbox gets opened earlier than usual every morning. One partner may not know the truth yet. They can feel the emotional withdrawal surrounding it. That's what makes shame psychologically powerful. Shame changes behavior long before truth gets exposed. The person carrying the secret becomes more defensive, more distracted, more emotionally unavailable. And eventually, ordinary conversations begin feeling heavy for both people. One person is silently carrying panic. The other is silently carrying confusion. And over time, emotional loneliness develops on both sides because financial secrecy creates isolation. The person hiding the debt feels alone because they're trapped inside fear. The other person feels alone because emotional honesty inside the relationship slowly disappears. And eventually, the real damage is not even the debt itself. It's realizing someone you love has been suffering beside you in silence, while pretending everything was normal. And if you're carrying that kind of secret right now, remember this. The truth may shake a relationship for a moment, but silence slowly poisons it every single day. Sign 2. Hidden spending. Habits, secret spending, and emotional comfort. Sometimes financial secrecy begins with something incredibly ordinary. An online order. A shopping bag quietly moved into another room. A package arriving during lunch hours because nobody is home. At first, these moments seem harmless, And honestly, sometimes they are. But when spending slowly becomes something hidden instead of shared, emotional trust quietly begins changing. One of the clearest signs is how quickly explanations appear. Oh, it was cheap. I bought this a while ago. I used points. The explanation arrives before the question even comes, and psychologically, that matters, because it reveals anticipation of judgment. Over time, the behavior usually becomes more intentional. Receipts disappear. Purchase histories get deleted. Taggers get removed from clothes before they're hung inside the closet. And strangely, the emotional damage often has less to do with the money itself and more to do with concealment. Because secrecy changes the emotional rhythm of everyday life, people become cautious around each other, more observant, more defensive. The relationship slowly stops feeling emotionally relaxed, and eventually, one person starts quietly checking bank accounts before bed, not because they want control, but because they no longer feel emotionally safe enough to simply trust. And on the other side, the person hiding the spending often doesn't fully understand their own behavior either. Many people use spending as emotional comfort. A difficult week, feeling emotionally drained, feeling unseen or disconnected inside the relationship. For a few moments, buying something creates relief, a temporary emotional escape. But when comfort starts requiring secrecy, intimacy slowly begins fading in the background. Because hidden spending teaches couples something dangerous. We are no longer emotionally open with each other. And once emotional openness disappears, even normal conversations start feeling emotionally exhausting. Sometimes people don't need judgment as much as they need emotional safety, because many hidden spending habits are really hidden emotions wearing a price tag. Sign 3. Financial control, disguised as responsibility. Control hidden behind "I'm just helping." Some forms of financial tension are difficult to recognize because they don't look toxic at first. In fact, they often look responsible. One person controls the finances because they're better with money. They manage the bills, track spending, control savings. And initially, the arrangement may even feel comforting. Life feels organized, stable. But emotional imbalance rarely begins dramatically. It begins through repetition. Tiny moments where one person slowly loses financial freedom without fully realizing it. At first, it sounds reasonable. Maybe ask me before buying that. We need to be more careful. I'm just trying to protect us. And slowly, permission replaces partnership. One person begins explaining every purchase. Basic spending starts feeling emotionally uncomfortable. At the grocery store, they pause for a second before tapping their card, mentally calculating whether they'll need to explain the purchase later. And over time, guilt becomes attached to spending altogether. What makes this psychologically complicated is that the controlling partner often genuinely believes they're helping. They see themselves as responsible, protective, practical, but emotionally, constant financial control changes the balance of power inside a relationship. Because when one person controls access to money, freedom, or decision-making, the other person slowly stops feeling equal. And emotional inequality creates silent resentment, not explosive resentment. The quiet kind, the kind that grows over years inside everyday moments. The controlled partner may stop voicing opinions, stop asking for things, stop feeling emotionally safe expressing their needs. And eventually, emotional exhaustion replaces emotional intimacy. Love is supposed to feel like partnership, not permission. Sign 4. Hiding financial. Silently carrying failure alone. There's another type of financial secrecy many couples never fully recover. From hiding failure, losing money, failing investments, losing a job, financial problems that feel too painful to admit out loud. At first, the silence feels temporary. I'll tell them once I fix this. I just need a little more time. I don't want them to panic. But fear changes people emotionally. The more someone hides vulnerability, the more emotionally isolated they become. And over time, they stop sharing emotionally altogether. They become distracted, mentally distant, harder to reach. And the partner often feels this emotional absence long before they understand the reason. One of the saddest visual moments in relationships can look unbelievably normal. Every morning, someone still puts on office clothes, still leaves the house at 8 a.m., still kisses their partner goodbye, even though they lost their job 2 weeks ago. That emotional mask is heartbreaking because the silence is usually not about manipulation. It's about shame, the fear of disappointing the person they love, the fear of looking weak, the fear of becoming a burden. But carrying pain alone for too long quietly changes relationships. Eventually, the relationship begins operating on incomplete reality. One person knows life has changed completely. The other continues living normally beside them, and intimacy becomes impossible when reality is no longer shared equally. That's why financial betrayal feels emotionally disorienting, not because of the numbers themselves, but because someone suddenly realizes, I was standing beside a person who was suffering alone, and I didn't even know. Some people stay silent because they're terrified of disappointing the person they love. But carrying pain alone for too long can quietly make two people strangers. Sign 5. Secretly building different futures. Emotionally leaving before physically leaving. Sometimes the most painful financial secret has nothing to do with debt. Sometimes it's discovering that one person quietly stopped believing in the future of the relationship long before they admitted it out loud. This is one of the quietest forms of financial infidelity. Not cheating, not dramatic betrayal, just someone emotionally preparing to leave in silence. Maybe it starts with a private savings account, a hidden emergency fund, money slowly separated from the life both people once planned together. And what makes this emotionally devastating is that the secrecy is often not about independence. It's about doubt. One person no longer feels certain the relationship will survive, but instead of saying it openly, they begin preparing emotionally and financially for an exit. At first, nothing looks obviously wrong. The relationship still exists, conversations still happen, daily routines still continue. But emotionally, something has already shifted. Future planning becomes uncomfortable. Long-term conversations get delayed. Big life decisions quietly disappear from discussion altogether. And eventually, one partner starts feeling something deeply unsettling. We're still together, but somehow we're no longer building the same life. That realization rarely arrives dramatically. Usually it arrives slowly, inside postponed conversations, avoided dreams. The strange feeling that emotional commitment has quietly weakened. And psychologically, this kind of distance is incredibly painful because the relationship often ends emotionally long before it ends physically. One of the quietest forms of betrayal is preparing an escape plan without ever telling the person sleeping beside you, because by that point, the separation has already begun internally, not loudly, not visibly, just silently. And maybe that's the deepest heartbreak of all, realizing someone slowly stopped believing in us while still pretending to stay. Conclusions. And maybe that's what makes financial infidelity so emotionally painful. Eventually, the problem stops being about money altogether. It becomes about emotional visibility. The feeling that two people are no longer fully allowing each other to see what's happening inside their inner world. Because trust rarely disappears in one dramatic moment. Most of the time, it fades quietly, inside shorter conversations, avoided honesty, tiny behavioral changes couples barely notice while they're happening. And by the time someone finally says, something feels different between us, the emotional distance has often been growing for a very long time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently.